Sorry. Yes, something else had come up on my slide. My apologies. Thank you so much to our two women who gave the testimonies and our three speakers, and keeping so well between you to time. I'm going to ask all the panel to now unmute and also have your videos on. I can see you've got your videos on, and we now move on to the discussion part of this webinar. I'm going to take the liberty of going up to some of the questions, and I guess we might like to start with Natasha Carr's comment on that the testimonies were very sad to hear, and that these practices addressed through some routes, but they're not the midwifery care that she has experienced or worked with. And I thought, Sue, maybe you could give us some insights into, I think you already spoke about the Mumsnet survey, to say, well, how common are these?
Yeah, thank you, Natasha. I mean, it's a really good point to make. And I think one of the things that we probably need to be thinking about is, why is it that given very similar political and socio-political circumstances, some hospitals, some units, some midwives, some doctors seem to buck the trend and do much better than others. So it's definitely true that there are large numbers of women and babies and birthing people who have very positive experiences. But actually, if even one has an experience like the ones we heard today, that is one too many. So, and we know it's far more than one. So I think, and I kind of agree with Natasha, but I also think that what we should be doing is, rather than keeping quiet about that, about those services and organizations where things are going so well, we need to be really looking for them and saying to them, how are you doing this? How are you managing this in the context that everybody else is struggling, or not everybody, but I mean, many other people are struggling so hard with. And if you look at the data, some of the data show this, that different hospitals are doing things very differently, with the same kind of financial and staffing issues. How? So I think that's a very big question for us to be pursuing.
I just
add what you said to add to that. Sorry.
Yeah, so I'd say that definitely it's important to learn from where we get it right, and learn what good looks like. I'm just also going to put a plea out there that a lot of the conversations I'm hearing and the feedback I'm hearing is coming from a particular demographic, which is largely white and European. And the work that I do with migrant women speaks to a very different birthing experience, and their voices are hugely underrepresented. So that was the play around, we have to seek those voices in order to make sure we've got a culturally competent service.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Thank you. So there's another question saying, is there a danger about talking about women and birthing people being involved in decision-making rather than in control of decision-making, which masks the reality that the birthing person has the right to ultimately control and to decline care, and that we should respect this? I don't know whether, Sue, you might start with that one.
Yeah, and I actually responded. I don't know if that was Sheena's comment as well, but I responded to Sheena. Thank you for bringing that up in the general chat box. Absolutely, and I think this is partly what we're both. I think we have been referring to. The testimony where women are constantly asked to change, asked if they will consent to something until they agree. So that any color as long as it's black, again, it's that same thing, isn't it? Oh, you choose blue. Well, actually, we haven't got blue. Would you like to choose black, please? So I think that's the running narrative that runs through all of this, and I think that it's come out in a number of different studies. Claire Feely's found it in a few of her studies about women making unconventional birth choices. I think there was one particular example where the midwife was told to keep going back to the woman because she was making the wrong decision. So the midwife was trying to support the woman, and every time she went and reported that to the midwife in charge of the ward, she was told to go back and ask her again until she made the right decision. And I think that it's this notion that decision is the final decision has to become something that we accept, and not only accept it but not to accept it with bad grace, but to accept it and go, that's fine, that's perfect, that's the right decision for you, let's work with that and see where we go with it. Because you have to build, if we set up conflict, then all that's going to happen is increasing conflict. You're going to get into a downward spiral of toxic conflict, and that, I think, is part of the problem in some of these trusts where things aren't going as well, that the space to to accept that people don't always make the decisions you want them to is just not there, because the organization is becoming so insistent that the staff within it behave in a certain way and tick a certain number of boxes and write certain things down. And it becomes very difficult to operate outside of that restricted space if you're a member of staff, and just to say, no, that's what she said, that's what we're going to do, and we're going to do it with good grace, and we're going to do it with compassion, and we're going to do it with skill, and we're going to follow through.
I would just add to that, Sue, that I agree that the comment around the final decision is the woman birthing person's decision. I mean, what I was talking about very much, and I'm advocate of, is that shared decision making is a process, it's a conversation, and women, have the right to make a bad decision. I say bad, I'm going to put that in inverted commas. It may be something that, it may not be a decision that the healthcare professional would make. And I'm just picking up on one of the other comments in the chat box around, we have this risk averse culture, and how do you balance between sort of the pressures on the health professional as an individual from the institution to, make sure that you keep going back to someone until she makes the right decision. I think, in this shared decision-making process, we have to recognize that every health professional has a duty of care. And if we look at litigation, it's where we breach that duty of care to the woman. But that duty of care, implicit in the discharge of that duty of care, is to ensure the woman or birthing person has access to the right information, the evidence-based information, and to not put our bias onto how we couch that discussion of risk. And this is where I come back to, if you think about some women who make the unconventional decision to have a home birth, if they're in an otherwise high-risk pregnancy, actually what the evidence-based information there would be to determine what her absolute risk is of outcome, sort of morbidity outcome number 1, 2, and 3, and to ensure that they have the right information to make an informed decision. That is what is expected of us by the rights, the human rights side, but also legally as well. And I think we sometimes lose sight of that, and this has come back to what Stella was talking about, women and birth people have capacity. We can't escape this historical embedding in our psyche that women are, by nature of having a uterus, irrational and incapable. And I think that is deep in our psyche when we approach these difficult conversations. And the thing that saddens me hugely, and there've been a number of cases, I don't know if anyone here is following open court where you can attend. I mean, there've been shocking cases of women who are making decisions that are then pushed through the court system because of this fear that they're making the wrong decision, and the questioning of their capacity and their rationality in making those wrong decisions. And that is a very dangerous path to go down, because we end up having a coercive situation that is becoming legally pressed upon a woman.
So I'm going to go to Stella next.
Thank you. So building the conversation, a couple of ideas. One is a linguistic a commentary that comes from English. When in English you say shared decision making, it's not clear where the hyphen is. Just by virtue of saying it, it's not clear that it is a shared decision making. It is not a shared decision making. This is not at all a problem in other languages, like in Spanish. In Spanish, it's very clear how we say it. But in English, the fact that the rules, the guidance, are talking of SDM, which is even more shorter, leaves this in the ambiguity. Are the professional and I going to share what? The process of making a decision, because the decision is mine. The final say, who has the final say? The user of the health service, the patient, us, in any other service in the hospital or in any area of health, as it is also, of course, enforced and supported by the law. So the first thing is that it is not clear to many of us that what the shared what is shared, if at all, is the process of making the decision. Now, this is even more intriguing because no one would have a problem to understand this in other areas of medicine. To me, what it is always interesting is what happens to women that does not happen to people. And I just want to mention, for example, someone who has as a religion being he or she is a Jehovah's Witness, and they don't want to be transfunded to receive blood infusions or transfusions. There is no way they will end up with one of those blood transfusions. There is just no way. But those no ways happen in maternity services, and that has to do with how we take the no and the expression of will when they come from someone else than a man, or when they come from a woman. That's the second thing I wanted to say. And the third thing is that, as you both were saying, we should not just kind of think too quickly. Of course, women are in capacity. Of course, women are fully entitled subjects. Of course, we don't think anymore that just because of having a uterus, you reason not that well or not well enough. Of course not. We are beyond that. And we should not think that those, let's call it now, prejudices, for just not using other words, are gone by will, or just because we don't like them to be playing their role. And it is still the case that women's testimonies in court, as you were mentioning, Brenda, are less valued, have less importance as in different situations. So yeah, it's not only that it happens, it's that it happens because we are talking mostly of women's bodies and women's lives.
Can I just make another quick point as well, which is to follow, it's a different point to the one Stella's made, but I also think it's worth bearing in mind that we also, as health professionals, I'm talking as a health professional here, make the assumption that the evidence we've got is good evidence, but actually very often it isn't. The evidence, for example, on large babies, well, scans are inaccurate for large babies. The evidence on dating, even now, ultrasound scans are, if you have an early ultrasound scan, it can be out by up to 5 days. And if you have a mid-trimestral ultrasound scan, it can be out by, I don't know, 2 weeks or more. And Brenda may know more about this, but not necessarily accurate. And I think this is the other thing, that the evidence is presented as if it is inviolate and absolute. And in fact, there's many stories of women being induced, for example, for big babies or small babies when their baby was perfectly normal weight, or because the babies, whatever reason. But the inaccuracy of the knowledge we have, I think, is very problematic. And I think we have to have some humility here when we're having the conversations with women. We used to say that everyone should have a routine episiotomy if they were primogravid, or babies should routinely be laid on their stomach, or women should routinely have DES if they were whatever. I think that was for pregnancy sickness, wasn't it? Or thalidomide, or whatever. We've done these things for so long, saying this is routinely good for you, and then thought, oh, actually it's not. Shucks, let's stop doing that. And yet we still keep doing these things and saying to women, well, this is a routine that, even if we say to them, we think you routinely you should be induced at a certain gestation because your risk of stillbirth goes, as Brenda would have it, from whatever it is, 1 per 1,000 to 3 per 1,000 or something. And the woman goes, oh, well, that means 997, they're going to be okay, but 3 not. But I don't like that 3. But actually, we don't know really completely accurately the gestation of a baby to be able to make that judgment for that individual woman specifically. So I think in all of these things, we have to say, we're giving you the best information we have, but actually there are loads of queries around this information we're giving you. So we can only give it you in those boundaries of our uncertainty, our own uncertainty. But of course, we don't do that.
Thank you, Sue. So there's one other thing around the importance of quality preparation classes that teach communication skills, negotiation, expression of needs. and what's expected from the partner can make a difference. So what do you think about, the question is, do you underestimate the positive impact of that preparation period around that dialogue, and whether the current health service, where you might see a different midwife or healthcare practitioner each time you come for your antenatal sessions, makes that continuity difficult? Sue and Brenda, you might want to address that.
Want to go first this time, Brenda?
Brenda, I think you're up first.
So I misunderstood you. I thought you said I'll go first that time. I mean, your question, I'm going to bounce this back to Sue, because actually the work of our midwives in birth preparation is extraordinary. And I think they're, given that pregnancy is physiological and that the majority of women are cared for by midwives rather than obstetricians, I think the work that's put in prior to coming to birth, in both in talking with women and listening to what their values are, what their background is, what their hopes, fears, and anxieties are, and then helping them articulate that into a birth plan. I mean, by the way, I do think that on every ward round, every delivery suite, the first thing you should do, unless it's time critical not to, is actually look at a woman's birth plan to enable you to get a snapshot of the person who's inside that room. So I think antenatal education is phenomenally important. You're absolutely right. When I'm dealing with matters of complaints, one of the most common themes, second to communication lapses, is the lack of continuity of care and lack of relationship building with a trusted health professional. When I say trust, it's someone who is listening, who is interacting with you in a positive way to help you towards planning the birth, with the understanding that, labor is one of those extraordinary experiences. It's at the sort of hands of our autonomic nervous system. We can't control it, but we know there's a lot of things we can do in terms of preparing for it. So I'm going to hand over to you at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the difficulty is if you get all that preparation and again, we heard it in our testimonies, if you then hit the labour ward and, nobody pays any attention to it, but that's almost worse than not having it in the first place, because your expectations are then not met. I'm not saying that women shouldn't have it, they should, but I think we should be very conscious when we unravel that or ignore it, that we're doing twice as much harm as we would do, if it wasn't there in the first place, I think. Yeah, I mean, I think the question was also, should we be changing the system to permit more of that to happen? And I'm sure everybody on this call knows, or at least those in the UK do, that the government commitment, the maternity commitment, is for continuity of carer for all women, and specifically enhanced continuity of carer for women who are in more marginalised or disadvantaged groups in the next year or two. I can't even remember what the current deadline is, 2022, I think. So, because it's shifted a bit. So that is the commitment, and it is being rolled out in many places around the country. There are questions about how well it's being done. So in some places it's being done very well. In other places, if you have an elective cesarean and see the midwife that you saw antenatally, the box is ticked to say you've got continuity, which is highly debatable. So I think, like all these things, there's always a risk that edicts get corrupted, but the edict is there and the backing is there to try and do it. There might be more about this in the next week or so, because the Health Select Committee is reporting on maternity services. So there might be some interesting information about what's happening with that commitment over the next week, in the next week or so, in the UK anyway. But yeah, so long answer to your question, Ashok, but yeah, there is a government commitment. It is supposed to be happening, and I guess we hope it's going to happen more effectively in more places, and that it both works for women and for staff, because part of the problem is life-work balance questions when it's not done well. But the intention is it should be, and it should also integrate with obstetrics so that women have a seamless experience.
So one question, not from the question and answer box, but from me, is that it seems to me that when we're talking about a lot of these things, when we're talking about trying to get shared decision making, that there certainly appears to be some strain between the woman's values, maybe the healthcare practitioners, and also between them and the organizations, where people are saying, well, I've got to follow the rules, and there's a strain there. And when you have this lack of shared values or conflict, how do we resolve that? Because on the one hand, you'd say the main outcome, which is a healthy baby, a healthy mum, and a good birthing experience, you would think that was a shared value across all of those stakeholders. So where is it going wrong, Brenda and Sue?
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on something that was in the chat box that you're right, there's sometimes this conflict, but if I think about the woman that I've had the privilege to care for in the last 20 odd years, who've chosen to deliver, I'm going to put this in inverted commas, deliver outside guidelines. When I listen to why they're making those choices, which are perfectly valid choices, quite often at the heart of that is the previous birth experience and where we fell down. And Elsaline has put something in a conversation that's been happening in the Q&A around the fact that when we think about risks and benefits, you're absolutely right. Of course, women want them to be healthy and their child to be healthy. Sometimes we have a very patriarchal view that the woman is merely the carrier of the fetus, and therefore her needs and wishes and values and desires are secondary to us as the patriarch safeguarding that poor little baby. And that erodes the fundamental principle in law, which is that pregnant woman is still a fully entitled citizen. And if she is of rational mind, which the majority are, and has capacity around a decision, then she is entitled to make what we might deem as a poor decision, but it's her decision to make. So I think there are various tensions that have been described there. The thing that Elsaline was saying, which I think is really important, is that in our discussion of risks and benefits, we're very good at stacking the risks in sort of immediate safety terms. You know, if we do not deliver your baby now, this baby's going to die. Yeah, okay. The reality is that, you know, very few women, if faced with a time critical situation, are going to deny the sort of that something needs to happen quickly. But in those are the major sort of less common catastrophes. What we're talking about here relates to what the first two witnesses were talking about. It's the sort of the chronic, endemic, low-level denial of women being heard in the context of labor. And that, you know, coming back to my colleague's description of 20 odd years of working with women with PTSD from childbirth, the thing that triggers that in the longer term is the not being heard, no one cared, no one listened. And what we fail to balance as organizations as well as individuals, when we're talking about risks and benefits of women and we're considering some of the complex decisions, is actually what is the impact on future well-being of this woman? So I know I've kind of deviated slightly off track, but I really wanted to pull in that sort of really important point about future welfare of the woman and the fact that we're dealing with not just the isolated major decisions that happen occasionally, but the multitude of decisions get made every single day.
Yeah.
So get the final word on this before we move on.
From me?
Yeah.
But I think it's just, I was going to say that, yeah, we do. I mean, I agree with Brenda. And I think the trouble is that everybody says, yes, we want a healthy baby and a mum. We want the mum to have a positive experience, but we don't agree on what that means. So it's a bit like I say mouse, and you think you imagine a keyboard, something attached to a keyboard, and I'm thinking of a grey thing that runs around the house. And we're both going, oh yeah, mouse. Yeah, we agree, yeah, mouse. But actually, the conceptual underpinnings of that are entirely different. So it's almost again worse because we think that we're in agreement, and we go away and we do our stuff thinking we're in agreement. And then we're like, well, why have they done that? We agreed. You know, and I think it does again come back to what Brenda's saying, that the life course for women, from our work, you know, what matters in the end is that they are well, the baby are well, but that they adapt to motherhood with self-esteem, with positivity, with the capacity to parent in a way that, you know, in a way that makes them feel good, it makes their family feel good. That very much long-term business is what really matters, as well as the immediate problems, as Brenda said. But, you know, if we're talking mouse and we're not explaining what we mean by mouse, then we're not capturing that at all. And we can't understand why we're operating in different spheres. We don't understand why different things are happening because we thought we were speaking the same language, but we're not.
And I would like to add that it is also that we are talking mother and baby, woman and baby. But in fact, what is going on is much more intertwined. so that as much as we have to talk about and we want to acknowledge that what it is at stake is as much health as well-being, that those two factors apply as much to the mother as to the son or daughter, because in fact babies are also not only someone's that we want them to be healthy, but also someone's who we want to be happy. And in this kind of combination that is the adic entity that women or recently birthing people and babies are, there is no way to have one without the other. And that is why also this has so much impact, because we are not talking only about those who give birth. We are talking about everyone, because everyone is being born.
Thank you. On that note, I'll bring the discussion session to a close. Thank you to Brenda and Sue and Stella for answering those questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of those questions, but those are recorded and we will pass them on to the panelists. And I know that there are many other comments in the chat as well, which help the debate.